Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. I had been wanting to upgrade my phone for months, and after finally saving enough, I decided to sell my old one. The phone still worked perfectly fine, but it was a bit outdated, and I knew I could get a decent amount for it. I posted an ad online and quickly received a message from a potential buyer. After some back and forth, we agreed on a price, and I arranged to meet the buyer in a safe public location to make the exchange. The transaction went smoothly. The buyer seemed like a nice person, and after a quick inspection of the phone, the deal was done. I transferred all of the data I needed, wiped the phone clean, and handed it over. I had no reason to think anything was amiss. The buyer handed me the cash, and I walked away feeling satisfied that I had made a fair sale. It was just a simple exchange, nothing out of the ordinary. However, things started to take a strange turn later that evening. I had just settled in for the night when I received a text message from an unknown number. It was short and cryptic. "You shouldn't have sold it." I stared at my phone, confused. I didn't recognize the number, but the message gave me an unsettling feeling. I brushed it off, thinking it might just be a random prank or spam message. But when another message came through an hour later, I started to feel uneasy. The next text was even more unsettling. It read, "You will regret this. I know where you live." I sat up in bed, my heart racing. My first thought was that this was some kind of mistake or a joke. I hadn't done anything wrong, so why would anyone threaten me? But as the minutes ticked by, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The text was coming from my old phone number. The same number I had just sold. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it. How was this possible? The buyer should have immediately taken possession of the phone and changed the number. I had wiped the phone clean, so there should have been no connection between it and me. I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I decided to block the number and move on, but that didn't stop the messages from coming. Over the next few days, I received more threatening texts, all from the same number. The messages became more personal, almost as if the sender knew things about my life that they shouldn't. "You're going to regret this," one of the texts read. "I'm watching you." The messages didn't make sense, but the fear was real. I started to feel paranoid, like I was being stalked by someone who had access to my phone number, and it didn't help that the messages always arrived late at night. I decided to contact my phone provider to see if they could help me trace the messages. After explaining the situation, the customer service representative assured me that they would investigate. They told me that it was possible that the phone number had been reassigned to someone else, but that they would need time to look into it. I was frustrated but grateful that they were taking it seriously. However, after a few days, I didn't hear anything back from them. The messages continued to arrive. The threatening texts became more aggressive. "I'm at your door," one of them read. I rushed to the window, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was nothing outside. I checked the locks on my doors and windows, just to be sure. But no matter how many times I checked, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. It felt like I was constantly on edge, like I was waiting for something terrible to happen. One evening, as I sat in my living room, I heard a faint knock at the door. My stomach dropped. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. I had no way of knowing if it was the person behind the messages or just someone at the wrong door. My mind was racing and my pulse was pounding. I decided not to open the door and instead peered through the peephole, but there was no one there. I felt both relieved and disappointed. It was just another mind game, another way to make me doubt my own safety. As the days went by, I started to lose track of time. I couldn't concentrate on anything, and the constant dread that something terrible was coming was starting to take its toll on me. I tried to reach out to the buyer to ask if they had experienced anything strange with the phone, but when I tried calling, the number was disconnected. It made my stomach turn. Why would they disconnect the number if everything was fine? Was this all part of some larger plan, or was I just caught up in some random, horrifying situation? I knew I had to take action. I contacted the police and explained the situation. The officer I spoke with seemed sympathetic, but said there wasn't much they could do unless the messages became more direct or there was an actual threat of harm. Unfortunately, unless someone shows up at your door or there's a physical confrontation, there's not much we can do, the officer explained. It was frustrating, but I understood that there were limits to what they could do. They advised me to keep a record of the messages and let them know if anything escalated. I tried to continue with my life, but the constant messages wore me down. I couldn't go a day without looking over my shoulder or checking my phone for new texts. The messages had become more specific, almost like the sender was playing with me. "You're not safe," one of them read. "I've been following you for days." The thought that someone could be in my life like that, someone who knew things about me that I hadn't shared, made me feel sick. I had no idea what I had gotten myself into by selling that phone. One afternoon, I received a text that made my blood run cold. "I know where you work." The message was followed by a photo of my workplace, taken from a distance, but unmistakably clear. I couldn't take it anymore. I was terrified and felt completely helpless. I didn't want to wait for something to happen, so I made a decision. I packed my things and left town for a few days, staying with a friend in a different city, hoping that a break from my home would provide some relief. It was during this time away that I finally received a call from the police. They had traced the number and were able to locate the person responsible for the texts. To my shock, it was the buyer I had sold the phone to. Apparently, they had been using the phone to send the messages as a form of intimidation, possibly because they had an issue with the sale. But they had taken the phone without changing the number, and I had unknowingly become the target of their anger and frustration. The authorities took the necessary steps to ensure that the buyer was held accountable for their actions. I was relieved that the situation was finally being resolved, but I couldn't shake the fear of how close I had come to something much worse. I was grateful to be safe and to have the support of my friends and family. Selling my phone had turned into a nightmare, but in the end I learned to be more cautious about who I trusted and how I handled my personal information. It wasn't just a phone, it was a reminder of how easily privacy could be violated. Story 2. When I saw the job listing, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had been searching for work for months and nothing had panned out. As a remote worker, the idea of being able to manage my own hours and work from home seemed like a dream come true. The position was described as a customer service role with flexible hours, offering a decent salary for part-time work. It seemed perfect for me, and I eagerly submitted my application. Within days, I received an email offering me the job. The email was professional and explained everything I needed to do to get started. It said they had a simple onboarding process, requiring only a quick training session, which would be held over video call. I was thrilled at how quickly everything was moving. I felt like I had hit the jackpot, finding something that fit my skills and schedule so seamlessly. I was also excited about the fact that the company was remote, which meant I could work in the comfort of my own home. The training session was scheduled for the next day, and I logged in, feeling eager to start my new role. The video call started with a brief introduction from a person who spoke in a calm, professional tone. They explained the basics of the job, how to manage customer inquiries, and how the software worked. It all seemed legitimate. They even went through a couple of practice calls to help me get familiar with the system. I was happy with the process and reassured that I was making the right choice. However, there was something odd about the whole setup. The company seemed overly focused on my webcam during the training. They kept asking me to adjust the camera angle to ensure they could see me clearly. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe it was just a way to ensure I was paying attention, a common tactic for remote work environments. But as the call went on, they began to request that I move the camera to different angles, even asking me to show them certain areas of my workspace. I brushed it off, thinking it was just part of their security measures, or maybe even their corporate culture. After all, I was a new hire, and they had to ensure I could be trusted in their environment. But then, during one of the breaks in training, the person on the call casually mentioned that they had access to my webcam feed. This threw me off. They didn't explain how or why they needed access, but they seemed completely nonchalant about it. For a moment, I wondered if I had misinterpreted the situation, but the nagging feeling in my gut didn't go away. I decided to do a little research on the company when the training session ended. I searched for their website and any online reviews, but I couldn't find much. There was no official website, just a basic page with some vague descriptions of what the company supposedly did. The phone number listed was disconnected, and the email address didn't seem to match any reputable domain. My stomach dropped as I realized something wasn't right. I couldn't understand it. Everything had seemed so real. The training, the paperwork, the communication, it all appeared perfectly legitimate. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that I had fallen for a scam. The company didn't exist. I began to piece everything together: the excessive focus on my webcam, the lack of information available online, the strange request for privacy invading angles. All of it pointed to one thing: they just wanted access to my camera feed. Fear gripped me as I started to think of the implications. Had they been recording me? Were they watching everything I was doing during the call? My mind raced and panic started to set in. I had always been careful with my personal information online, but in this instance I had been careless. I didn't think twice about allowing the webcam access, and now I was terrified of what they might have seen or what they might do with that footage. I immediately checked my computer settings, trying to figure out if there was any way to confirm whether the company had access to my webcam. I opened my device manager and checked the camera settings, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I didn't know much about tech security, but I knew enough to understand that hackers could bypass simple security measures. I quickly disconnected my computer from the internet and started looking for ways to secure my device. I realized I needed to take action. The first thing I did was change all my passwords and enable two-factor authentication wherever possible. I also ran a full system scan with antivirus software to see if there were any hidden threats. As I waited for the scan to finish, I realized how vulnerable I had been. I thought about the information I had shared during the training call. Had they gotten anything personal from me? Could they have stolen my identity? My anxiety spiked as I imagined the worst-case scenario. The scan came up clean, which was a small relief, but it didn't completely ease my worry. I wasn't sure how sophisticated these scammers were, but I had heard of instances where cyber criminals could still access devices without leaving traces behind. I decided it was best to contact a professional, someone who could look at my system and determine whether there had been any unauthorized access. I called a local tech support service and explained what had happened, hoping they could help me. When I spoke with the technician, I felt a small sense of comfort. They were able to walk me through some additional security steps to ensure my webcam was completely disabled, and they also advised me to install more robust software to monitor my devices. They told me that webcam hacks were unfortunately becoming more common, with scammers using the footage for blackmail or other malicious purposes. My heart sank as I realized that I was not the first person to fall victim to such a scheme. The technician also suggested that I report the incident to the authorities, particularly since there had been an attempt to deceive me and access my personal devices. I hesitated at first, unsure of how to approach the situation. After all, it seemed like a minor issue compared to other cybercrimes. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how serious it could have been. If they had access to my camera, they could have been monitoring me for far longer than I knew. I decided to file a report with the local police, providing them with the details of the job listing, the training session, and the strange behavior I had noticed. The officer I spoke with seemed concerned and told me they would look into it. He also advised me to take additional precautions, such as covering my webcam when it wasn't in use and being more vigilant about online security. I appreciated his advice, but I couldn't shake the feeling of violation. I had been tricked into trusting these people, and now I didn't know if I could ever feel completely safe again. Over the next few days, I took steps to make sure nothing like this would happen again. I researched ways to protect myself from webcam hacks, installed better security software, and ensured my devices were up to date with the latest patches. I also started educating myself about common online scams and how to recognize red flags. While the incident had shaken me, I was determined not to let it define me. I had learned the hard way, but I was now more prepared to protect myself in the future. Eventually, I moved on from the incident. It was hard to shake the feeling of having been watched, but I knew that I had done everything I could to secure my devices and protect my privacy. I continued to work from home, but I was always more cautious. The experience had been a wake-up call, reminding me that not everything online was as it seemed, and some people would go to great lengths to deceive and exploit others. While I couldn't change what had happened, I had gained valuable knowledge that would help me stay safe moving forward. Story 3. I had been looking for a more productive place to work. The small apartment I rented was quiet but cramped, and the distractions of home life were starting to get to me. A co-working space in a nearby building caught my attention, and after checking out the website and the space itself, I decided it was worth a shot. The place had a modern design with plenty of desks, high-speed internet, and a calming atmosphere that seemed ideal for the kind of work I did. I signed up for a monthly membership, excited about the change in environment. The first few days at the co-working space went smoothly. I was impressed by the quiet, focused energy of the place. There were other freelancers and small business owners, all in their own little corners, working away. The environment felt professional yet friendly, with plenty of opportunities to network. The staff was friendly, the coffee was good, and everything seemed perfect for what I needed: a place where I could focus without distractions. However, after a few days, I started to notice something strange. It was subtle at first, but the more I paid attention, the more it unsettled me. There were moments when I felt watched, like someone was staring at me from above. It wasn't the kind of feeling that would be easy to explain to others, but it made my skin crawl. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it was just the unfamiliarity of the space or the stress of being in a new environment. But then, one afternoon, I was sitting at my desk deep in concentration when I heard a faint noise above me. It was almost imperceptible, a soft scraping sound. I froze, trying to identify where it was coming from. The sound was definitely above me, as if someone was moving slowly across the ceiling. I glanced up, but the ceiling was just the usual tiles, smooth and unremarkable. I quickly dismissed it as nothing more than the usual sounds of a building settling, but the unease lingered. As the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The noises from the ceiling seemed to grow more frequent, though still faint. Sometimes it was just a small tapping, like fingernails drumming against wood, and other times it sounded like something larger, something moving with more weight. There were even moments when I thought I could hear soft breathing or rustling, as if someone was hiding just above me. It was strange, and despite how hard I tried to focus, I couldn't ignore the feeling that someone was up there, watching me. One day I decided to investigate. I had been working late, staying long after most of the other tenants had left, when I heard the familiar scratching sound above. This time it was louder, and I couldn't deny it any longer. Someone was up there. I stood up, trying to gather my thoughts, wondering if I should speak to the staff or maybe even call the authorities. But my curiosity got the better of me. I had to know what was going on. I walked over to the reception desk and asked the employee about the building's layout. I explained that I had been hearing strange noises coming from above and wondered if there was a maintenance issue with the ceiling. The employee looked at me with a confused expression before telling me that there was no reason for any noise in the ceiling. According to them, there was nothing in the building's plans that would explain movement or activity up there. That only deepened my suspicion. That evening, after the co-working space had mostly emptied out, I stayed behind. I waited until the staff had locked up and left for the night, then I slipped back inside. The building was eerily quiet, with only the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I made my way to the back of the space, near the break room, where there was a section of the ceiling tiles that seemed to be slightly askew. It was subtle, but I noticed it immediately. The gap wasn't big, but it was enough to see the outline of something above. I grabbed a chair and stood on it, carefully lifting the ceiling tile. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, above the tiles, was a crawl space. And it wasn't just any crawl space, it looked lived in. There were blankets, food wrappers, and even a small bag tucked away in one corner. I felt a cold chill crawl down my spine as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Someone had been hiding up there, watching us. I quickly dropped the tile back into place and backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. I could barely process what I had just seen. The noises I had been hearing, the scraping, the rustling, were all from someone who had been living above us, observing everything that was happening in the co-working space. The idea that someone had been watching me, maybe even from just a few feet above, was terrifying. I immediately decided to leave, but before I could gather myself, I heard footsteps coming from the hallway. I froze, trying not to panic. Whoever was in the building would hear me if I made a move, so I stood perfectly still, holding my breath. The footsteps grew closer, and I realized that the door to the co-working space had been left unlocked by the staff when they left. I quietly ducked behind a desk, hoping to stay hidden. The footsteps passed by, and I held my breath, praying that I wouldn't be discovered. Eventually, the sound of the footsteps faded, and I felt a sense of relief wash over me. but I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever. I had to act. My first instinct was to call the police, but I realized I needed proof before I did anything. So I grabbed my phone and quickly snapped a few pictures of the gap in the ceiling. Then I made my way out of the space as quietly as possible and called 911 from my car. When the police arrived, I showed them the pictures and explained what had been happening. They took me back into the building, and we went directly to the spot where I had seen the crawl space. The officers lifted the ceiling tile, and the evidence was undeniable. The crawl space was indeed occupied, and there was enough evidence to suggest that someone had been living there for an extended period of time. The police immediately began their investigation, searching the space and making sure there were no other hidden areas in the building. It didn't take long for the authorities to discover that the person living in the crawl space had been using the co-working space to monitor people. They found belongings hidden in the space, including a laptop with footage of employees and tenants in the building. The person had been sneaking down at night to use the facilities and watch people work, using the ceiling as their private hiding place. They were arrested and taken into custody, and the building was thoroughly searched for any other hidden spaces. In the aftermath, the co-working space went through a complete renovation. New security measures were put in place, including cameras and a more thorough check of the building's infrastructure. The staff was shocked by what had happened, but they were thankful that it had been discovered before things escalated further. As for me, the experience left me shaken. It was a reminder of how easily we can become oblivious to the things happening around us, and how important it is to trust our instincts when something feels off. I never returned to that co-working space. The thought of someone watching me from above, hidden in the ceiling, haunted me for a long time. The experience had changed how I viewed public spaces, making me far more cautious and aware of my surroundings. It also made me more appreciative of my personal space and the sense of privacy that I had once taken for granted. I still worked remotely, but I chose a new place, one that felt safer and a lot more secure. Story 4. I had recently moved into a new place and was trying to clear out some of the clutter from my previous home. The idea of joining a local buy and sell Facebook group seemed like a good way to make some extra cash while also decluttering. I signed up, posted a few items, old furniture, a couple of electronics I didn't need anymore, and some kitchenware. It felt like a practical solution to get rid of things I no longer used, and I was hopeful that it would be a smooth and easy process. Little did I know, my decision to join the group would soon lead me into a situation that would leave me feeling more exposed than I ever anticipated. At first, things were going well. I received messages from potential buyers, asking for more details, negotiating prices and making arrangements for pickups. I felt like I was in control of everything. It was a simple exchange, and I was getting rid of my old things. But as the days went by, I started to notice something strange. One user, who always seemed to be the first to comment on every post I made, began to show an unusual level of interest in everything I posted. They would leave comments asking for updates on items I had already sold or inquiring about others that hadn't even been listed yet. At first, I thought it was just coincidence. Maybe they were just an eager buyer or someone who liked to keep track of things in the group. But the comments started to feel a bit too persistent. They would comment on items I hadn't even gotten around to posting yet, asking if I would be putting them up for sale soon. The messages came flooding in, and each one felt increasingly more invasive. They weren't just asking for details, they were asking for specifics, asking about items I hadn't mentioned in my posts, but like asking for the condition of a couch that wasn't even listed yet. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I decided to ignore the person at first, thinking maybe they were just overly enthusiastic. However, as I posted more items, the messages kept coming. They would follow up on everything, tracking the smallest details and reminding me to keep them in mind when I listed something new. It wasn't just the frequency that was unsettling, it was the fact that this person knew things they shouldn't have known. It became clear that they were not just following my posts, but actively keeping tabs on every item I had ever mentioned in the group. I felt like I was being watched. The situation escalated when I posted an old television for sale. Almost immediately, the same user commented, asking me for more details and offering a price that was even higher than what I had listed. I found it odd, but I didn't think much of it at first. However, as I began to arrange the sale, I started to feel increasingly uncomfortable. The person was insistent on picking it up at a specific time and seemed to know exactly when I would be home, even though I had never mentioned it publicly. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was overthinking things, but the anxiety lingered. One afternoon, I received a message from them saying they had been watching my posts for a while and had noticed I was selling a lot of items. This was the point where my unease turned into outright fear. How did they know all this? How did they know what I was selling before I posted it? I felt exposed, like I had unwittingly invited someone into my private life without realizing it. The worst part was that the person wasn't even being rude or threatening, just unnervingly polite, but there was an underlying tone that made my skin crawl. I started to look back through the messages and posts, trying to find any clue that would explain how they knew so much. That's when I realized they had been keeping track of not just the items I posted, but everything about me. They knew where I lived, or at least where I was located, based on the items I was selling and the times I posted them. They seemed to be piecing together a picture of my life, and that's when I knew I had to stop. I blocked the person immediately, hoping that would end things. But the next day, they were back with a new account. It was clear that I wasn't going to be able to stop them just by blocking one account. This person was relentless. I felt trapped, like I couldn't escape from the constant attention. It wasn't just about selling items anymore, it was about the fact that someone had been monitoring me, tracking every movement, and I felt like my privacy had been completely invaded. I couldn't trust the group anymore, and I began to delete all my posts, removing myself from the group entirely. Despite my efforts to hide, the messages didn't stop. They began to take on a more aggressive tone, accusing me of ignoring them, demanding to know why I was suddenly acting distant. It was clear that this person was upset, and I wasn't sure if that meant they were going to escalate things further. I felt completely vulnerable. It was terrifying to think that someone out there was so obsessed with my every move, and it made me feel unsafe in my own home. I contacted the group's moderators to report the person and explain what was happening, but they seemed dismissive. They told me that there wasn't much they could do unless the person broke the group's rules. This left me feeling helpless. How could something so disturbing be allowed to happen in a space that was supposed to be a community? I had done everything by the book, posting items, being polite, following the group rules, and yet I was the one feeling like I had done something wrong. I could only imagine how many others had experienced similar situations but hadn't spoken up. But in desperation, I decided to take a more proactive approach. I tightened my security both online and in real life. I made sure that all my social media accounts were private and that no personal information was available to the public. I also started to take extra precautions when it came to my physical security. I installed cameras around my house, made sure all my locks were secure, and even changed my daily routine so that I wasn't as predictable. The strange messages and persistent tracking continued for a while, but eventually they stopped. After a few weeks, there was no new activity, and I began to feel like I could breathe again. The sense of being watched finally started to fade, and I was able to resume my life without the constant anxiety. I don't know what caused the person to stop, but I was thankful for the peace I had regained. In the end, I learned a valuable lesson about online safety and the importance of protecting one's privacy. The experience also made me much more cautious about joining groups or communities where I didn't fully know the people involved. Even though the situation eventually resolved itself, I knew I would never feel completely comfortable with the idea of sharing personal information online again. I had learned the hard way that sometimes the price of convenience is a little too high. Story 5. The day had started off like any other. My toddler and I had been looking forward to spending the afternoon at the park. It was one of those perfect days where the sun shone bright and warm, and the air was crisp but not too chilly. I had packed a small bag with snacks and a bottle of water, grabbed the stroller, and set off toward the park, ready to let my little one run around while I took a much-needed break. When we arrived, the park was relatively quiet, just a few families scattered around. I found a quiet spot under a large tree where I could keep an eye on my toddler while they explored the swings. My little one seemed so happy, laughing and chasing after other children, running with such energy that I couldn't help but smile. I watched them for a while, soaking in the peace of the moment, thankful for the simple joy of the day. After a while, I decided it was time for a snack break. I walked over to the stroller and bent down to retrieve the bag, but as I did, something caught my eye. A small white object was wedged between the side of the stroller and the fabric, almost hidden from view. I thought it was strange and instinctively reached for it, pulling it out to see what it was. It was a small, thin, circular device, and as soon as I saw it, I knew exactly what it was: a hidden AirTag. I froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. Tags were designed to track items, but this wasn't something I had ever expected to find in my toddler's stroller. I immediately felt a wave of panic wash over me. How had it gotten there? Who put it there? I looked around the park, trying to make sense of it, but I didn't see anyone acting suspicious. I felt a chill in my spine as the reality of the situation set in. I checked the AirTag, hoping for some clue as to who might have placed it there. The device had no markings, no way to identify its owner. It was just an ordinary AirTag, but its presence was anything but ordinary. I quickly thought back to the trip to the park. Had anyone approached us? Had I noticed anyone lingering near the stroller when I was distracted? No, nothing had seemed out of place at the time. But now, with the discovery of the AirTag, I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was going on. My mind raced with possibilities. Who would want to track us? What were their intentions? My first instinct was to call 911, but I hesitated. I didn't want to overreact. Maybe it was just a mistake, a misunderstanding. But as the seconds passed, the fear that had gripped me only grew stronger. I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that I was being watched, that someone had been tracking our every move. I carefully placed the AirTag in my bag and wheeled the stroller back toward the park's entrance. My thoughts were swirling, and my heart was pounding in my chest. I had to get home and figure out what to do next. As I made my way back, I was acutely aware of every person I passed, every movement around me. It felt as though the park, which had seemed so peaceful just moments ago, had transformed into a place of danger. Once I reached the car, I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself. I needed to think clearly. My first priority was to make sure my toddler was safe. I double-checked the stroller, the car, everything I could think of, ensuring nothing else seemed out of place. Everything appeared normal, but the sense of dread didn't go away. I knew I couldn't let this go without investigating further. When I got home, I immediately contacted Apple support. I needed to know how to track the AirTag, how to figure out if someone had been using it to follow us. They explained that, while AirTags were designed to be used for tracking lost items, but they also had features that would alert you if an AirTag was following you without your consent. I felt a small sense of relief knowing there were some safeguards in place, but I still couldn't shake the feeling of being violated. I followed the instructions Apple had given me, and after a few tense moments I confirmed that the AirTag was indeed linked to a nearby device. My heart sank as I realized that someone had been tracking us in real time. The possibility that someone had been watching us at the park, waiting for the right moment to act, made my skin crawl. I quickly contacted the authorities, explaining what had happened and showing them the AirTag. I wanted to make sure they had all the information they needed to track down whoever was behind this. The authorities were quick to respond, and soon enough, they were at my door. They took the AirTag and began investigating, using the serial number to track its history. It was then that I learned the AirTag had been activated just a few days earlier, around the same time I had started going to the park. The realization that someone had been following us for days, if not longer, made my blood run cold. I was shaken, but I also felt a strong sense of determination. I had to find out who had done this and why. The investigation took several days. Well, in the meantime, I kept my toddler close, not letting them out of my sight for a moment. I was terrified, but I refused to let that fear control me. I had to protect my child, and that meant staying strong in the face of this unsettling situation. I stopped going to the park for a while, unwilling to risk putting myself and my toddler in danger. But as the days passed, the authorities managed to trace the AirTag to a device that had been registered under a fake name. The police were able to gather more information, and soon enough, they identified the person who had been tracking us. It turned out that they had been monitoring several people at random, using AirTags to follow unsuspecting victims. When they arrested the individual responsible, I was both relieved and disturbed. The person had been targeting families, specifically those with young children. The thought that someone could be so malicious, so intent on causing harm to innocent people, left me feeling violated in ways I couldn't fully explain. I was glad that the situation had been resolved, but the sense of unease remained. I couldn't forget the feeling of someone watching me, of not knowing who was behind it all. It took a long time for me to feel safe again, and I found myself double-checking everything, from my toddler's stroller to my own phone. The sense of security I had once taken for granted had been shattered, and it would take time to rebuild. Despite the fear, I tried to focus on the positive. My toddler was safe, and the person responsible was no longer a threat. I knew I had done the right thing by reporting the incident and taking steps to protect my family. While the experience had shaken me to my core, it had also taught me a valuable lesson about vigilance and the importance of being aware of the dangers that can lurk in the most unsuspecting places. Over time, I started going back to the park again, though I was always more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I had learned to trust my instincts and to take action when something didn't feel right. It was a hard lesson, but one I would never forget. Story 6. It was the kind of trip I had always dreamed of, solo, free, with the open road ahead and nothing to worry about except capturing the perfect shot from my travel vlog. I had been planning it for months, meticulously researching destinations, booking flights and picking hotels that fit my budget and vibe. The excitement of traveling alone had always appealed to me, the idea of being in control of my own adventure. The hotel I checked into on the first night was a charming little place, tucked away on a quiet street in a town I had never visited before. The room was small but cozy, just what I needed for a few nights of rest before continuing my journey. The walls were painted in soft pastel colors, and there was a simple vanity mirror above the small desk. I set my camera gear down and unpacked, eager to explore the town and get some footage for my vlog. As I wandered around the hotel, I felt a strange sense of calm. There was something almost nostalgic about the place, the kind of hotel you would see in an old movie. That evening, after coming back from filming a few shots around the town, I walked into my room and immediately noticed something strange. A note was taped to the mirror. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small piece of paper with words hastily scribbled on it. The writing was jagged, as if written in a hurry, and the message itself was cryptic. "I see you. You're not alone." I froze for a moment, unsure of how to react. At first, I thought it was a prank, maybe something left by housekeeping as a joke. But something about it didn't sit right with me. I checked the rest of the room, looking for anything out of place, but everything seemed normal. There were no signs of a break-in or any unusual activity. Still, the note gnawed at me. It felt like I was being watched, like someone was aware of my every move. I took a deep breath, trying to brush it off. Maybe it was just a coincidence, something harmless. I didn't want to overthink it, especially not when I was so far from home. I pulled out my camera and filmed a quick update for my vlog, telling my followers about the quaint little hotel and the odd note I had found. I made light of it, laughing off the weirdness for the camera. After all, nothing had happened, and I was still in control of the situation. But as I sat on the bed, reviewing the footage, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to call it a night, hoping that I would wake up to a fresh start and forget about this strange note. The next day was filled with more filming and exploring. I walked around the town, capturing the sights and sounds, enjoying the freedom that came with being alone. The town was picturesque, full of old-world charm and hidden gems. I met a few locals who were kind enough to chat with me, and I was beginning to feel more at home. The distraction of the day helped take my mind off the note, but deep down I knew something wasn't quite right. When I returned to my hotel room that evening, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. As I entered, I saw it again, another note taped to the mirror. This one was different, though. The handwriting was more deliberate, the words even more unsettling. "I know where you are going next. I've been following you." My heart skipped a beat. This was no longer a simple prank. Someone was watching me, and they knew details about my plans that I hadn't shared with anyone. I looked around the room, my pulse quickening. There was no one else in sight. The door was locked, and everything seemed as it should be. I considered calling the front desk, but what would I even say? How could I explain that someone was leaving cryptic notes in my room every night? I was alone, with no one to turn to. I took a deep breath and called my best friend back home, needing some comfort. I briefly told them about the notes, and while they reassured me, telling me to stay calm, I could hear the concern in their voice. I wasn't imagining things, and I knew it. That night, I locked the door, pulled the curtains tightly closed, and sat by the window watching the street outside. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to make their move. My thoughts kept drifting back to the notes, to the way they seemed to be tracking my every move. I tried to sleep, but each creak of the floorboards, each gust of wind against the window made my heart race. I didn't feel safe, not in this room, not in this town. The next morning I decided to take action. I walked to the front desk and asked the receptionist about the history of the hotel. I wanted to know if anyone else had reported anything unusual. The receptionist seemed taken aback by the question, but assured me that nothing out of the ordinary had happened during their time working there. They explained that the hotel had been around for decades, but there had never been any complaints or strange occurrences. I wasn't convinced. That evening, after another long day of filming and trying to push aside my growing anxiety, I returned to my room. To my shock, there was yet another note. This one was different again, more personal. I know what you're hiding. You can't escape. My hands trembled as I read the words. Whoever was doing this was escalating, and I didn't know how to stop it. I looked over my shoulder, checking the corners of the room as if expecting someone to jump out from the shadows. My mind raced as I tried to think of what I should do. I couldn't ignore this any longer. I grabbed my phone and tried to reach the local authorities, but I didn't know how to explain the situation. How could I prove that someone was watching me, that they had been leaving these notes in my room? The police would likely dismiss it as a prank. I couldn't risk it. I decided to leave, to pack my things and check out of the hotel, but as I reached for the door handle, I stopped. A cold chill ran down my spine as I realized someone had been in the room while I was out. The mirror was fogged, and there were fresh fingerprints on the surface. The last note had been written on a scrap of paper torn from a larger sheet, and I could see faint smudges of ink on the edges. It was clear that whoever was doing this had been inside, watching me, and now they were getting bolder. They knew where I had been, what I had been doing, and they were playing some twisted game with me. My hands shook as I grabbed my belongings and rushed out of the room. I couldn't stay there anymore, couldn't take the risk. I called a cab and had it take me to the bus station, where I booked the earliest ticket out of town. I didn't care about my vlog anymore, didn't care about the footage I had left behind. I was done. The trip that had started as an adventure, a journey of freedom and discovery, had turned into a nightmare. I didn't return to the hotel, and I never found out who had been behind the notes. But I couldn't forget the feeling of being watched, the sense of dread that had crept over me each night. I continued my travels, but I never stayed in another hotel like that again, always opting for places with more security and more peace of mind. The notes had left a scar, a reminder that not every adventure is as carefree as it seems. Story 7. When I first signed the lease for the smart home rental, I thought I was getting a modern, cutting-edge living space. The home was advertised as fully equipped with the latest technology: smart lights, smart locks, climate control, and even voice-activated appliances. It seemed like the perfect place to live, offering convenience and a sense of luxury that matched my busy lifestyle. I was eager to move in and start my new chapter, enjoying the sleek design and innovative features. The idea of controlling everything with just my voice or a few taps on my phone felt like something out of the future. I moved in and immediately started setting up my new home. The voice-activated system was easy to use, and it felt great to walk in and have the lights turn on automatically, the temperature set to my liking, and the door unlocking as I approached. I was impressed with how smoothly everything worked, and I quickly got used to the convenience of it all. But something felt off, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. At first, I chalked it up to the excitement of the new place, but as the days passed, the unease started to grow. It began with small things, random lights turning on at night, the temperature changing without my input, and the locks on the doors clicking and unlocking at odd hours. At first, I thought it was just a glitch in the system. After all, with so many connected devices, there had to be some hiccups every now and then. But the occurrences became more frequent, and I started to feel like someone was watching me, controlling things from afar. I even mentioned it to the landlord, who assured me it was just a minor issue with the system, and that they would send someone over to fix it. One evening, I was sitting on the couch, relaxing after a long day, when the lights in the living room suddenly flickered on. I wasn't near the smart control panel or my phone, and I definitely hadn't given the command to turn the lights on. I sat there for a moment, confused, but then dismissed it as a malfunction. As I was about to get up and check the settings, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before walking toward the door. When I opened it, no one was there, just a feeling of cold air lingering in the doorway. But I closed the door, shaking my head, and tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid. The next day, things took a strange turn. As I was cooking dinner, I noticed the thermostat adjusting itself again, this time setting the temperature to an uncomfortably low degree. It wasn't a huge change, but it was enough to make me shiver. I manually increased the temperature, but as soon as I walked away, the system adjusted it again. I felt my frustration rising, and I grabbed my phone to check the settings. To my shock, when I opened the smart home app, it showed that I wasn't the only user controlling the system. There was another account listed, one that I hadn't set up and didn't recognize. Panic settled in as I realized that someone who had access to the system, was controlling the settings without my consent. I checked the history of changes, and sure enough, there were numerous adjustments made to the thermostat, lights, and even the security system, all logged under this mysterious account. I tried to delete it, but the app wouldn't allow me to remove the account. I attempted to contact the landlord again, but when I called, I was only greeted with a voicemail. The unease I had felt before now transformed into fear. I didn't know who had control of the system, but I was certain they were still monitoring me. Late that night, as I lay in bed, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. My heart raced as I sat up, straining to hear. I grabbed my phone and checked the security cameras, but all I saw was a blurry figure moving in the hallway. It was the middle of the night, and I was the only one home. There was no logical explanation for what I had seen, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was in the house with me. I quickly checked the door lock secure. The cameras had been turned off, though, and I couldn't figure out how or why. The following days were a blur of fear and confusion. I tried everything I could think of to regain control over the system. I reset the smart home hub, changed my passwords, and even contacted tech support for assistance. But no matter what I did, the strange occurrences continued. I would hear noises, see lights flicker on and off, and the temperature would change without any input from me. The most unsettling part was the fact that the previous tenant's account still had full access to the house, and no one seemed to be able to explain why or how it was possible. I grew increasingly anxious, unsure of what to do. I was beginning to feel like a prisoner in my own home, at the mercy of an unknown presence. I considered leaving, but I didn't want to give up my beautiful new place, especially when I hadn't done anything wrong. But every time I tried to relax, something would happen. The front door would unlock in the middle of the night, the lights would flicker, and I would hear voices, soft whispers coming from the walls. I didn't know who to trust or where to turn for help. It wasn't until one afternoon when I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone, that I finally saw something that made my blood run cold. A message had appeared on the smart home app from the previous tenant's account. It simply read, "You're not alone. I'm always watching." I froze, the words sending a chill through my spine. I had no idea how they had gained access to my system, or why they were still able to control it. I immediately contacted the police, explaining the situation, but when they arrived and checked everything, they didn't find any physical evidence of anyone entering the house. The smart home system was locked, and no one had breached the security in any traditional sense. It was as if I was fighting an invisible force, one that had complete control over everything in the house. After the police left, I decided I couldn't live like this anymore. I contacted the landlord once more, demanding that they change the security settings, reset the system entirely, and give me full control over the home. This time they finally responded, telling me that they would send a technician to fix the issue. The technician arrived the next day, and after a thorough inspection, he confirmed that the previous tenant had indeed set up the system to allow remote access, but they couldn't explain why it hadn't been properly disabled when the property was vacated. It turned out that the rental agency had failed to properly reset the system before leasing the house to me. The technician worked diligently, removing the previous tenant's account and making sure that all the security settings were reconfigured to my sole control. As he left, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The house felt different, calmer, as if the presence that had been lingering in the air had finally dissipated. The strange occurrences stopped, and I was finally able to enjoy the smart home as it was intended, secure and under my control. Though the experience left me shaken, I was relieved to have the situation under control again. I learned a valuable lesson that day. When it comes to smart homes, there's more to security than just locking the door. As I settled into my home, I couldn't help but wonder how many others might have experienced something similar, living in homes where they thought they were in control, only to realize they were not alone. Story 8. It was already late, far later than I usually like to stay out, but I had a work event that ran longer than expected. I stood outside the venue, trying to flag down a rideshare to take me home. The city was quieter than usual, the streets emptier as the night crept on. It was around midnight, and I was eager to get back to the safety of my apartment. After a few minutes, I got a ride request. A black sedan pulled up, the headlights flashing briefly before it stopped in front of me. The driver greeted me with a casual smile, but there was something about his expression that felt off, almost too blank. Still, I was tired and just wanted to get home. I climbed into the back seat and settled in, giving him the address of my apartment. As we pulled away from the curb, I glanced at the GPS on my phone, noticing that it had already registered the route. The familiar map was guiding us as we moved through the quiet streets. I settled back and tried to relax, closing my eyes for a moment, but something nagged at the back of my mind. It wasn't the route that was unfamiliar, but the silence in the car. Normally I'd expect small talk, maybe an introduction or a quick comment about the weather, but there was nothing. The driver didn't say a word, and I didn't push for conversation. I kept my eyes on my phone, watching the GPS as it updated the distance to my apartment. But as the minutes ticked by, I noticed something strange. The GPS map started to act up. It would freeze for a moment before jumping ahead, like it was trying to reroute us. My finger hovered over the screen, about to refresh the app, but I hesitated. "Is everything all right?" I asked, unable to hold back the question anymore. It felt awkward, but the growing unease in the pit of my stomach made me need to say something. The driver's response was unsettling. "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice flat and distant. His eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. It was as if my question had never even registered with him. I was starting to feel a bit of a chill, but I couldn't pinpoint why. Something about the way he spoke, the lack of emotion, unsettled me. I glanced at the GPS again and noticed that the route had changed. We were no longer heading straight for my apartment. Instead, we seemed to be veering off course. "Excuse me," I said, my voice firmer now. "The map says we should be turning left, but you're going straight. Are you sure you're on the right path?" The driver didn't answer right away, his fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly. I felt the tension in his posture, and it only made me more anxious. "It's fine," he muttered, not looking at me. "I know where I'm going." I stared at the GPS, feeling the knot in my stomach tighten as the route continued to shift. We were moving farther away from my neighborhood now, heading deeper into a part of the city I didn't recognize. The streets were darker here, the houses more spaced out. I tried to push my panic down, telling myself it was probably nothing. Maybe the GPS was just glitching, or maybe the driver had taken a wrong turn. "Can you pull over?" I asked, my voice slightly shaking. "I think you missed my street." The driver didn't respond. Instead, he reached over and turned off the GPS on the dashboard, his hand brushing the screen. The sudden silence of the car felt deafening. The lack of any guiding map made everything feel even more real. I could feel the panic rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the GPS had just malfunctioned. But then I noticed he wasn't slowing down. He wasn't planning on stopping. "Hey," I said, "pull over," I demanded, my heart pounding in my chest now. The driver didn't even glance at me. He kept his eyes on the road, his face as emotionless as before. He didn't speed up, but he didn't slow down either. He was driving as if he had no intention of following the normal route. "You're not getting out," he said flatly. "We're going to a different place." A wave of terror washed over me. My hands clenched the seat beneath me as I realized I was no longer in control of the situation. The car moved smoothly down the road, the headlights cutting through the darkness. I felt trapped, confined in the back seat, my phone useless without GPS to guide me. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice now shaking with fear. The driver finally turned his head toward me for the first time since I'd gotten in. His eyes were cold, unfocused. "You'll see when we get there," he replied, his tone still flat and detached. It was the kind of voice you would use when talking to a stranger, someone you had no emotional connection with. I could feel the weight of his words, the finality in them, and it made my blood run cold. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. I looked out the window, hoping to recognize a landmark, a sign, anything that would help me figure out where we were. But everything outside was unfamiliar. The streets were desolate, the buildings seemed old, and the further we drove, the less any of it resembled the city I knew. I thought about calling 911, but the thought of pulling out my phone and alerting the driver to my plans made me hesitant. If he noticed, who knew what he would do? I took a deep breath and forced myself to stay calm. There had to be a way out. I decided to try a different approach. I think I left something important at home," I said, trying to sound casual. "I really need to get back. It won't take long." I hoped maybe a change in tone would make him more willing to cooperate. but the driver just shook his head slowly. "You're not going back there," he said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "We're going somewhere else." I tried not to panic, trying to think through every option. If I could just get him to stop for a second, maybe I could escape. But as the minutes stretched on, the car seemed to grow colder, the air more suffocating. I felt like I was sinking into the darkness with no way out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the driver turned onto an unfamiliar street and slowed the car to a stop. The place looked abandoned, run-down buildings lining the road with broken windows. The silence in the car was overwhelming. "Get out," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. I didn't wait for him to say it again. Without a second thought, I opened the door and bolted out of the car, running as fast as I could down the street. I didn't dare look back. My only goal was to get away. I ran until I found a street light, a few people walking in the distance, and my hands were trembling as I fumbled for my phone. I dialed 911, my voice frantic as I explained everything to the operator. The police arrived soon after, taking my statement and confirming that there were no other rides in the area matching the description of the car I had been in. They searched the area but found nothing unusual. I don't know what happened to that driver or where he took me. The only thing I know is that I was lucky to escape. That night still haunts me. Every time I take a ride now, I can't shake the feeling that something could be wrong, that the next ride could be the same. I've never taken another late-night ride since, and I don't plan to. Story 9. I had been looking forward to this wellness retreat for weeks. The idea of spending a few days surrounded by nature, detoxing my mind and body, seemed like the perfect escape from my chaotic daily routine. I had signed up in hopes of finding some peace, maybe even a little clarity, from the stress that had been consuming me lately. The retreat's website promised a serene atmosphere, focusing on mindfulness, yoga, and healthy living. I felt like this could be just what I needed to reset and recharge. The first day was everything I expected. The location was beautiful, nestled deep in the forest with a peaceful river running through the property. The air was fresh, and the sounds of birds and rustling leaves were soothing. We started the day with a gentle yoga session followed by a nutritious breakfast made from locally sourced ingredients. I felt lighter, more relaxed than I had in months. It seemed like everything was aligned perfectly, and I was excited for the next few days. As the second day went on, things started to feel a little off. There were no clear instructions about what was coming next, and the schedule seemed to shift without warning. Meals were served at odd times, and we were encouraged to spend hours in silence, which initially felt like a good idea but started to feel a bit isolating. Despite the quiet surroundings, there was an uncomfortable energy in the air, a subtle tension that I couldn't quite pinpoint. The instructors, who had been warm and welcoming on the first day, now seemed distant and cold, their smiles forced. Still, I tried to push through, reminding myself that this was part of the process, part of the journey to inner peace. By the afternoon, I began to feel the unease in my gut grow stronger. We were instructed to meet in a small, secluded area for a group meditation. I noticed that several participants who had been so eager to connect the day before were now hesitant and withdrawn. They sat quietly, avoiding eye contact, their expressions distant. I joined the group, trying to stay calm, but something about the energy in that room made my skin crawl. The meditation itself was different from anything I had ever experienced. There was a strange intensity to it, a pressure to surrender completely that felt almost oppressive. When the session ended, I felt disoriented, as though the tranquility I had come for was slipping through my fingers. We were told to rest in our rooms before dinner, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to take a walk around the property, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The woods that surrounded the retreat were beautiful but unsettling in their stillness. I noticed that the paths had been carefully maintained, too perfect almost, like they were trying to keep you from wandering off. I couldn't explain why, but the atmosphere seemed to shift the deeper I walked. I tried to return to the main lodge, but as I neared the entrance, I realized the door was locked. The staff members who had been so attentive before were nowhere to be found. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. My heart began to race as I stood there, trying to process what was happening. I could hear faint murmurs coming from the other side, but the door remained shut. Panic slowly crept up my spine, and I started to feel trapped. It was then that one of the retreat leaders appeared, smiling in a way that felt too forced. She greeted me politely and asked if I was feeling okay. I explained that I had gone for a walk but found the door locked when I returned. She apologized, saying that the schedule had changed and everyone was asked to stay in their rooms for the rest of the evening. I was told that it was for my own benefit, a way to allow myself to reflect and deepen the retreat experience. But something about her words didn't sit right with me. I felt an overwhelming urge to leave, but the door was locked, and I had no way of contacting anyone outside. That night I tried to sleep, but rest didn't come easy. The silence in the building felt suffocating, and the shadows in my room seemed to take on strange shapes. I could hear the faint sounds of people talking in the halls, but when I peeked outside, the corridors were empty. I tossed and turned, trying to convince myself that I was overthinking things, but a growing sense of dread refused to let me relax. My mind kept going over the oddities of the day, the forced silence, the locked door, the strange meditation session. I had no idea what was really going on, but I could feel myself slipping deeper into unease. The next morning, things only got worse. The staff was nowhere to be seen, and the few participants who were around seemed completely different, almost robotic. They moved in silence, their eyes blank, as if they were no longer aware of their surroundings. I tried to approach one of them, but they simply nodded in acknowledgement and walked past without speaking. I went to the dining hall in search of something familiar, but the atmosphere there was stifling. The food was bland and tasteless, served in large, unappetizing portions. It wasn't what I had signed up for. I decided to ask one of the instructors if I could leave. I had had enough and wanted to go home. I approached the person who had led the meditation session and tried to speak, but they wouldn't look me in the eye. Instead, they repeated that I should stay and reflect on my experience, that I was not yet ready to leave. I insisted, but the answer was the same. I was told that leaving early was not an option, and that the retreat experience was a process that needed to be completed. I tried to explain that I wasn't feeling well, that I needed to go home, but my words were ignored. It was clear that my request wasn't going to be honored. It was then that I realized I was not being allowed to leave. No one was giving me a clear answer about why. I had paid for this retreat, and yet I was being trapped in this strange, unnerving environment. I couldn't understand what was going on, but something in the pit of my stomach told me that I needed to get out, that I wasn't safe here. I spent the next few hours trying to figure out a way to escape without drawing attention to myself. I searched for an exit, a window I could crawl through, but the retreat was surrounded by thick trees, and there was no easy way out. I realized with dread that I was truly stuck. Finally, around midday, I approached one of the staff members who had been more approachable the day before. I quietly asked if there was any way to leave, just for a moment, to take a walk. She smiled again, but her eyes seemed hollow, and she told me I needed to focus on my inner peace. I explained again that I wanted to leave, that I felt unsafe, but her response was the same. I wasn't allowed to leave until the retreat was over. The more I pushed, the more forceful her response became. It was clear now that my words didn't matter. They were determined to keep me there, no matter what. By late afternoon, I made a decision. I would leave, even if it meant sneaking away. I found a side exit, and with a quick glance over my shoulder, slipped out into the woods. I didn't look back as I ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear voices calling from behind, but I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the woods. I didn't care where I was going, I just knew I had to get away. It felt like the longest walk of my life, but I eventually found my way to a road where I could flag down a car for a ride. I made it home that evening, shaken and exhausted. I didn't tell anyone about what had happened at the retreat. I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. But the experience haunted me for weeks. The realization that I had been trapped, manipulated into staying against my will, was a constant weight on my mind. I still don't know what exactly went on at that retreat, but I know one thing for sure: what I went through was not a normal wellness retreat. I don't think I'll ever forget how it felt to be trapped, powerless, and ignored in that strange place. It's a feeling that stays with me, even now. Story 10. Me. I had been working the night shift at the warehouse for almost a year. The work was straightforward, sorting packages as they came off the conveyor belts and into the sorting area. It was a quiet job that didn't require much thought, which suited me just fine. I would spend my nights moving boxes, scanning items and stacking them neatly according to their destinations. The hours were long, but I didn't mind. I had a routine, and it paid well enough to get by. One particular night, however, something happened that would stay with me forever. The usual buzz of the warehouse was interrupted when a large, unmarked box appeared on one of the belts. But it was unusual, because every package that came through was either labeled with a barcode or had some form of identification, but this one had nothing. It was sealed tight, and there was no company logo or address on it. I thought maybe it was a mistake, something that had been sent through without being processed properly. I pushed the box aside for a moment to clear the area, but something about it caught my attention. It was heavier than it should have been for its size. I couldn't help but wonder what could be inside. I had handled thousands of packages in my time working there, but this one felt different. I had a nagging feeling that I shouldn't even be considering opening it, but my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to take a quick peek just to satisfy myself and see if there was any kind of identification inside. I grabbed a nearby box cutter and carefully sliced through the tape sealing the box. As I opened it, I immediately felt a chill run down my spine. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as I looked closer, I realized what I was seeing. Inside the box were wrapped pieces of what looked like clothing, but it wasn't until I moved them aside that I saw what was beneath. There, nestled in the bottom of the box, were human remains, gruesome and unmistakable. My heart stopped. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. I froze for what felt like an eternity, staring at the contents of the box, unable to move. The remains were dismembered, wrapped in plastic, and packed tightly with foam padding. It was clear that whoever had placed them in the box had taken great care to conceal them. My mind raced, and a sick feeling twisted my stomach. I had seen things in movies, read about criminal cases, but I never imagined I would encounter something like this in real life. This was no accident. Someone had deliberately sent these remains through the warehouse. My first instinct was to call the authorities, but I wasn't sure how to explain what I had found. I was alone in the warehouse, and no one else was due to arrive for several hours. The last thing I wanted was to be involved in something like this. The decision felt like it was tearing me apart. I couldn't just leave the box there, but I also couldn't take it outside without risking contamination of evidence. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and tried to steady my voice. The operator answered quickly, and I could barely speak at first, my words choking in my throat. I finally managed to explain the situation, though I'm sure it came out as a jumbled mess. The operator assured me that they were sending someone to investigate and told me to stay put. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing with thoughts of who could have done this, why they had done it, and what I was supposed to do next. I felt like I was caught in some nightmare I couldn't escape. By the time the police arrived, the warehouse had taken on a surreal quality. It was as if everything around me was happening in slow motion. The officers took control of the situation immediately, cordoning off the area and calling in forensic teams. They didn't say much to me at first, but I could tell they were taking the matter seriously. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do at that point. Was I supposed to leave? Was I a witness? Did I have any responsibility in this? As the forensic team arrived, I was asked to give a statement. They questioned me about what I had seen, how I had found the box, and whether I had touched anything inside. I explained everything as best as I could, but I still felt a wave of guilt. Why had I opened the box? If I had just left it alone, maybe none of this would have happened. The officers reassured me that it wasn't my fault, that I was just doing my job. But that didn't stop the gnawing feeling that I had somehow played a part in this horrible discovery. The investigation went on for what felt like hours. They took the box, the remains, and anything else they deemed relevant for examination. I was told to stay in the break room while they finished their work. The silence was deafening as I sat there, staring at the walls, trying to process what had just happened. I kept thinking about how I was just another anonymous face in a city of millions, but now I was involved in something I could never undo. I couldn't stop imagining what had happened to the person whose remains I had found. Who were they? How had they ended up in a box at my warehouse? Eventually, one of the detectives came to speak with me. He explained that they had traced the box to a shipping company but hadn't yet figured out where it had come from or why it had been sent. The investigation was still in its early stages, and they had no answers yet. I was told to go home for the night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I would never be the same. My thoughts kept returning to the box, to the remains that had been so carefully packaged and sent to me. What kind of person could do something like that? I was told to stay in touch with the authorities and to report anything unusual. Over the next few days, I tried to carry on with my life, but everything had changed. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder,